Doe. Okay, got it.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. This is just an intro to React.js. My name's Hugh. I'm the team lead for Breakfast Optimist Club. I think I see some names I recognize and some that I don't, so I'm really excited for everyone to learn a little bit more about React. And then,
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm Nate, and I'm the treasurer for Active Future. I have a bit of experience working with React with you on a couple of projects, so I'm like pretty excited to talk to you guys about this too. So,
awesome. Yeah, so we'll get started here. So first of all, what is React? React is a great JavaScript framework for developing responsive web apps. React really gets its name from its reactivity. You can have things change when users do input really easily. It's an open source. It's maintained by Facebook. It has a ton of community support, and that's like one of its best features is that the npm package library. Almost all of them are built for React, and that's just great. And then Create React app is a tool we'll show off in a little bit here, but it's a great way to get started with React. It takes care of a lot of the complex stuff that you don't really need to worry about, and it's community supported. It's constantly updated, and it's pretty awesome.
yeah. So just going into some of the features of React. So don't want to like confuse you guys too much because we're going to be going into a demo, excuse me, in a little bit. So first, one of the features is called statefulness. So essentially each component on a website, so you might have like a form element. Each of that will kind of be its own like component, so you can like reuse it, kind of like a Java class. Um, and each of these kind of has its own internal state. So you can kind of think of that in Java terms and like as like instance variables or like fields of a class. And then those can kind of manipulate kind of how the UI will look. The next thing I wanted to talk about was JSX. And what's really nice about that is it's kind of a way that you can combine HTML with JavaScript expressions. So you can render like dynamically like a paragraph of text from something that you stored in the state or the instance variables. And then props, excuse me, is another thing that's really important in React. And essentially what this does is you can have a parent component and then a child component to that. So you can kind of think of that like inheritance in Java almost. But the nice thing is when you render that child component, you can send it some specific data. So like let's say you have a form element and you want to reuse that multiple times. So like you have a form element, but like one time you want the title to be like, um, I don't know, like input your username, and then another form could be like uh, the title would be like input your password or something like that. You can reuse the same form, but just pass it a different title. And then it'll kind of change the title based on that. So you don't need to have as much code reuse. Another thing in React I wanted to highlight was the use of the virtual DOM. This is a bit more complex. This is not really something that you need to worry about, but in terms of what React does that makes it really, really fast is it has what happens when you load a website is that there's I think it's called document object something, but this is essentially like the window of the website and making sure that like the browser can render it. What React does is uh, it keeps a virtual representation of that. And it just keeps checking every single time something changes. And instead of reloading the entire DOM, so basically reloading the whole web page whenever something changes, it'll only reload like a specific part of that web page. So what you can kind of see from this diagram, so when instead of reloading this whole document tree, if these yellow nodes change, it only reloads those nodes. It doesn't reload the entire DOM. And that makes it a lot faster because it kind of has like selective re-rendering of components. And last thing I wanted to highlight in terms of features of React is it has really, really good and really robust debugging tools. So like Chrome and Firefox, pretty much any major browser has really nice debugging tools. You can kind of go step by step, kind of like a IntelliJ debugger. So it's really, really nice, very well supported.
And then moving on, just going to talk a bit about why React is useful and why you should consider using it instead of other front-end libraries or just plain JavaScript. The biggest advantage with React is you don't have to do annoying JS lookups. I don't know if anyone has experience coding what front-end web development with just JavaScript and HTML, but a lot of it is just looking up elements in the HTML so that you can then perform an action on them. And so React gets rid of that using JSX. Another very, very beneficial thing is the single source of truth. So when you're programming, you only have to worry about what your state is. You don't have to worry about keeping track of a bunch of different variables, because React keeps track of the state, and then React will make sure that whatever your state is matches what should be rendered on screen, and that's really awesome. Another great thing is performance. React is built by Facebook. I mean, they use the web they do a lot of stuff with the web. They know a lot, lean on the experience of people who know what they're doing. So, you can use React for its performance benefits. It runs really fast. It loads really well. It's just a great library overall. JSX, Nate mentioned that earlier. It's a great way to write HTML inside of JavaScript and vice versa. And then components and simplicity, these are sort of related. Components allow you to compartmentalize your logic, which also simplifies what you have to think about at the same time. And so now we're gonna move on to a demo here. And if you just give me 1 second, I'm gonna switch to sharing my whole screen here. Are there any questions right now while we're switching?
Yeah, you can feel free to ask at
Yeah,
any point.
feel free to interrupt us at any time. Okay, so can everyone see my terminal here? Yep, okay, awesome. So here I just made a little demo folder on my computer, and I'm just gonna show
It
you
actually looks
guys.
like there's actually a question in the chat right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Vincent asked, what are the advantages over Vue or any other library?
I can answer this. I don't know if Hugh has experience using Vue, but I've used, excuse me, both Vue and Angular. Vue is actually set up very, very similar to React, but what's nicer about React is there's more support, and it's more widely used in industry than Vue, which is more of a relatively new framework. And a different thing about Angular, the components are a bit more um, compartmentalized, or they're not as compartmentalized as React. So in React, you have one file, and this has like all your JavaScript and all your HTML. But in Angular, it's kind of like split up, so that makes it a little bit more confusing. And also another thing is that um, Angular is like a framework as opposed to React as a website. So what an advantage of React is, like, you can use whatever router or like any other. So what a router does is it allows you to like change between different web pages. So if you have like an about page and like a home page, you could change between those. Um, you can use whatever type of router you want, and this makes React a lot more like portable, and you can kind of plug it into a lot of different places. But Angular is a framework, meaning that like you have to use the Angular router. You can't use any other router. Like there's one router you have to use, and like it kind of like cascades like that. There's one of like everything. You have to do it a certain way, and this can be like good and bad. It has like advantages and disadvantages, but I'd say this is like another plus of React, is you can kind of use whatever you want.
Yeah, I think Nate summarized it really well, and I think it's a great question too at the same time. More questions? Okay, awesome. So earlier in the presentation, I mentioned Create React App, and this is a tool that's made by Facebook and maintained by the community. And it's a really great way to make like a starter project right off the bat. And so I'm going to run it right now. So I'll do npx. And so npx is just Node Package Manager's file system, right? It lets you create things like this, and then you'll just type create React, create dash React dash app, and then you'll give it a name. In this case, I'm just going to write test here, and you hit enter, and then you should see it's going to start doing a lot of stuff. What it's doing right now is initializing a React app for us, downloading all the packages that are required, and then making sure that it all works properly on the system. And so the benefit of using this is you get a lot of more advanced features that you really don't have to think about. For example, Webpack is a great way to transmit files and CSS much more efficiently. And using this, you don't have to think about that. It just, it just happens on your computer. And so you can see it's downloading all the packages right now, fetching the libraries. And when it's done, it'll let me know that I can just CD into the directory, and we'll get coding. I've actually already started this process because it takes a little bit of time. And so you can see it just finished there, but I'm going to move into this demo directory, which I have pulled up in another in an IDE right now. And so demos was made the exact same way. There's no difference between demo and test. I just want to show you how test works. And now we can just do npm run start. And so what this will do, this will start up a React server, and it will also enable hot reloading, which is really useful when you're working. Whenever it detects something has changed, it automatically starts reloading the page. And so when I hit enter here, you can see it's going to start up the server, and it's going to zoom us over here to Firefox. And if everything worked right, it'll pull up the basic Create React app page, and we'll wait for that to pull up. And so yeah, this is what you should see, and this is just made by React to show off that everything was working properly. And you can see here it says edit source slash app.js and save to reload. And so now we're gonna zoom over here, and I'll go into the source directory here and app.js. I'm just gonna get rid of some of this starter code, right? And we're gonna
Wait,
start.
can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just put something in there just to show them that they that like it hot reloads. Like you don't have to do anything else.
So you guys remember it used to show something else, and I just typed hello world right there, and you can now see that hello world is what is displayed in the browser. A little bit about the file structure of React. Pretty much everything you're going to want to do will happen inside of this source directory here. Everything outside of that in public is what you probably won't change very much. Index.html lets you change just like some basic HTML stuff, but you probably won't mess with that very often. And this is also where you can set, in public is where you can set favicons, which are the icons that show up in the browser. And then inside of source here is where all the magic happens, right? So the website starts in index, and inside of index, we set up React up here and the React DOM. And then we tell the React DOM that we want to render, and we're just going to call app here. And app just calls, just renders whatever shows up in this file right here, app.js. Okay. So next, I'm going to give a brief demonstration of how JSX works. So as Nate mentioned earlier, JSX is a great way for us to get JavaScript variables inside of our HTML. And so here I'm just going to declare a var. I'll just call it hello, and I'll set it equal to world here. And now I can take this world and delete it. And if I use this special curly brace syntax, which is JSX at work, I can just type hello. And the variable I declared here is now going to be placed right here in the code. And so if we go back over, you can see that it's now hello world with the exclamation point at the end there.
Yeah, one more thing I want to add. You can kind of think of the JSX like it's like HTML, but whenever you put the curly braces, you're switching over to JavaScript. And then whatever is rendered in that JavaScript will then be converted back into HTML. So
yeah, that's a great way to think about it. One other great thing that we can do with JSX is we can declare HTML in JavaScript and then place that HTML into the other HTML that we have here. So for example, if I wanted to make a variable called like header here, I could do this. And then when I use the square brackets to do this, and inside here I can do an H1, which is just the highest level of header we can make, and say, welcome to the demo, right? And so now I can take this right here. In the same way we put hello in there, we can just put header as well. And when we save, it will, my code formatter makes it look nice. And then we go back over here, you can see it now prints welcome to the demo above. And this is really great if you have a consistent header that you'd like to have on like all your pages. You can do something like this, where you can say like, welcome to the to-do list or something like that. And then you can change it once and it changes everywhere on your site just the same way. The next thing we're going to move on to is talking about components. But before we do, are there any questions about anything we just did here? I know we just covered a lot all at once there, and I want to make sure everyone is on the same page.
yeah, feel free. You can type questions or talk. It's completely up to you.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Wait, I have one question. So for your var header, do you need the brackets there, or is it optional, or do you need it?
You do need these square brackets here. If I delete this, the JavaScript is going to get upsetty, I think.
I don't think it will actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess you don't need the brackets there. That's the way I've always done it, just because most often you'll use brackets when you're rendering like a list of HTML stuff, but yeah, I guess you don't need the brackets.
All right, thanks.
Are there any other questions? I think we just got a chat.
Oh, okay. Is that V? I don't want to mispronounce it. So what you need to do, I didn't know people were going to be following along during this tutorial, but you need to install the Node Package Manager. I can send you a link to that. Just pulling it up really fast, but that allows you to get access to the NPX and everything.
I'm sorry about that. We should have mentioned, yeah, to make all of what we're writing today work, Node is like the backbone of React development. And if you don't know what Node is just a way of running JavaScript on like a computer and instead of like in a browser. And so it's what lets it's what let React work. It's how you can write an Express backend and all sorts of things like that. And we should have mentioned that. That's our mistake.
The nice thing is though, we're recording this this presentation, and we're also going to have the starter code up on GitHub, so you can kind of like go through it, and like if you have any like issues with it, you can kind of like compare against that and see like what's kind of happening. So if you want to go through it like as your own tutorial, you're like definitely welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. The next thing we're gonna move on to is making another component. And so what we've done here inside of app.js is just a little bit of basic, manipulation, right? We can declare variables and we can show it in the JavaScript. But when you're working with React on a larger scale, often you'd like to compartmentalize components more. And so what a component is really just a reusable piece of your website. So for example, you can make a component of like a card that you're going to fill in with information, the same information multiple places. This is really useful if you're doing like profile pictures or like user cards or something like that. You make like one card and then you can just pass in data to that card and it'll render the same on every single situation. In this case, I'm going to make a new component that is a little to-do list application that we can use. But to start, I'm just going to say var name equals Hugh here. And we'll get back to this in a second. So the first thing that we want to do is go over to the source directory here, and we're going to make a new file, and I'm going to call it todo.js. And the first thing we want to do is import React from React. And we also need to import a component. And Nate, do you have the import command for that?
You can just do import React comma component.
Awesome.
In curly brace. Yeah.
Okay, and so
I can go through and kind of explain this part. So what you're saying here is that in this component, we're going to need some of like React stuff, and then kind of like defining what a component is, and then you can get all this from the React package. So now we're going to be declaring a component here. So we'll call this our to do, and if you have any experience with object-oriented programming, this statement might make, if you just look at the class to do extends component, that might make some sense to you. It means that like to do is like a type of component, and we just have to like we have to modify some kind of stuff that component does. And what's really nice is that component has a render function, and it basically says when this component is used in application, what do we want to render on the screen. So here we just render a div, which is just text, and then to do component. And one more thing I wanted to mention is what export and default means. That's not actually necessary, but what we use it for is when we want to use this in another class, we're basically saying this is the one thing that we want to get from this class. So it just simplifies the import statements a little bit. You don't need to worry too much about what that looks like.
Exactly.
So now Hugh's going to go back into the app.js. He simply has to import to do from the to do JS. It basically eliminates the use of that curly brace. And now if he wants to render that to do inside of this parent component, he can do so.
And so now we should see on screen all that we had in app.js as well as to do component right here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass in name here, and I'm going to say name equals name. And this is an example of how you pass props to a component. And we'll look at how we get that in a second, but the basic idea is that you have these predefined components like we just created, and then you can just type in all the different parameters that you pass into it. So we could also have like an age one and just say that that's like 16 or something like that, and do different things like that. And so you can have as many of these as you want. They can be of any type that you want. But for this start example, I'm just going to say name equals name here. And this name refers to the prop, and this name refers to this variable that we defined here. And so when we get back into this component, the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my props got passed properly. And so that can be done with the syntax that we're going to use quite a bit in React, and we're going to use the this keyword. And so what this means is it refers to the local state, props, and all the local variables of this specific component that we're working on in this situation. So I'm going to say this.props, and this will give me a list of all the props that I want. But in this case, I know that the prop I want is called name. And so I can do this.props.name. And so when we scroll back over here, you can now see to do component, and then my name is rendered right there. And the beauty of this is that if I put a space here, I can go back here and I can copy paste this component. And instead of putting my name now, I can put Nate here. And so now you'll see there's two separate components, and they each came from the same code base, but they're now showing two different things based on the props we entered. And I think we just got something in the chat here.
I just responded to it. He asked, do we need to import component? And we definitely do.
Yes, yes,
Because
correct.
otherwise it won't know. You can declare the render function, but React won't know what the render function does for this component. That's why we declare that it extends from component. And then we kind of just redefine the render function for our purposes to show what we actually want to render.
Yep, that's exactly correct. And so now,
one more thing. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt again.
no problem.
One more thing I wanted to highlight. If you have, I'm trying to like compare this as much to Java, because I'm sure that's like the language that people have the most experience with here. You can definitely think of this again like we're accessing a field from within this class. So props is like a field. You just can't see it because it's extended from component. So this field, which is defined in component, we're accessing it, and then we're getting a specific part of it. So we're just getting the name. So yeah, just trying to like keep relating it back to Java.
That's exactly correct.
I have something else to bring up. Do you guys want to, I don't know if you guys already talked about this, but do you guys want to talk about the difference between, in your app.js, it's a function, it's a functional component, and then this one's like a class component. Do you want to touch on that really quick and why they're different?
Yeah, I can do that. So a function, so this is the app right now is an example of a stateless component. So it doesn't actually have a state attached to it. All this does is this is just a render function pretty much. So it doesn't keep in any other data. It doesn't store any data. That's why it's called stateless. So it doesn't have. It's just another way that you can write a component. There's a class version and then the function version. And then whatever's returned from this function is just what's the equivalent of what's in the render function in the to-do.js. Vince has a question. Thought it didn't need to because what I've been doing is not importing component and just instantiating the component as a function and then exporting that function. Yeah, so that's another way you can do it. But we're showing you the way with a state because this won't have a state or props, and we kind of need to use that within the demo.
Yep. Are there any other questions before we move on? These are all great questions. Keep them flowing. Okay. So right now, what I want to do is I want to add just a little bit of styling here, just so it looks nicer when we finish. So I'll just say this is an H2, and I'm going to copy this closing tag and put it on the other side here. And I'll say that this is whoever's name, apostrophe S, to-do list. And so now when we go back, you can see that it'll say Hugh's to-do list and Nate's to-do list there. And this is just moving around the props that we had to show them in different ways. The next thing that I'd like to do is add a text area, right? And so this is going to be a space where the user can type whatever they want, and then we'll take that and put it into our to-do list. So I'll type a text area here, and this can be self-closing. And that just means that we can just do a slash like this as opposed to doing a slash text area like that. And we'll save that and just see what we get. And so now we can see that we have these two nice text areas. They're both from the same component that we've made. And the next thing that we need to do is grab the information that the user types in this field. So right now, when we type and hit enter, nothing happens. We can type, but the React doesn't really understand what's happening. And so we need to tell React how to get the information out of that text area. But before we can do that, we need to set up the state for this component. And maybe Nate can touch a minute or more about like how we can initialize the state while I'm writing this out.
Yeah. So when the component is created, they call the constructor. And if you have some experience again with Java, this should look pretty simple, or not simple, but similar to like what you've seen before. So in the constructor, you have to initialize all the fields of the class. But first you call super, which means you're calling the parents constructor. That's kind of similar to Java, like I said before. And then we need to initialize one of the fields of the class, which is the state. And then what we do here is we initialize the state to be a new item. And we want to have the text area line up the value that's in the text area that the user types in be saved within this new item field that we instantiated within the state. And the nice thing about the state is it's a dictionary. So you can put as many different like fields in it as you want. You can just keep going and going. Like there's no real limit to how much you can store in the state, which is basically the fields or the instance variables of the class.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so what Nate mentioned was that we want whatever value this new item has to be what's displayed in text area here. And so you can do that, but just by typing value and then equals this dot state dot new item here. And so this is a very similar syntax to the way we did this dot props, except now this is internal to this item or to this component. So we'll say this dot state instead of something that was passed in through the this dot props. And so if I say this like default now, when we scroll back over here, you can see that default is pre-populated in both of these to-do lists here. I'm going to leave it as blank because that's the easiest for the user to work with. And the other thing I'm going to do is right here, I'm just going to print out this dot state dot new item. And this is just going to let us see whatever value we have stored in the state new item. And you can see right now, obviously there's nothing there. And so now we need to add one more thing and then they'll all be hooked up properly. And that's the onChange function. And I don't know if Nate wants to talk a second about how onChange works.
Right. So you can kind of think of these as like props that we're passing to the text area. So we want the value of the text area, like you said before, to line up with the new item. But what happens when we do this is we also have to define what happens when the text in the text area changes. And kind of what he's saying here, this might look a little bit confusing, but you can just kind of think about this as we're defining every single time the user types in something, we want to update the state to reflect what's happening. So we reset the state to be whatever the value is. It's called event.target.value, but it's essentially what the value is of the text area, and just continue to update that as the user types in more information.
And so now when we come back over here, I'll zoom in just a little bit here so you can see when I say like hello, you can now see that hello is being typed out next to us. This is some text. And you can see how responsive it is. React is really, really fast with doing these types of state updates. And one thing that's one of the nicest things about React is you can make UI that's like incredibly responsive to user input because it is so fast at updating this. It's almost instantaneous. I can't even tell a difference while typing here. And so you can see like whatever we put in this one is only displayed here, and whatever we put in this one here is also only displayed down here. And that's another beautiful thing about React is that you don't have to worry about having like two components, right? They're all completely separate, and React takes care of all that for you.
And if you notice one more thing, the website was not reloading when you type that stuff because it's only updating that specific component. This makes it a lot faster.
Yeah, that's a great point. The next thing we want to do is add a button right here, and I'm just going to put a break just so it looks a little nicer. And here we'll just declare a basic HTML button, and this will look just the same as you'd expect. And I'll just say add right here. And when we go over here, now you can see we have a nice little button here. We could do some more styling in the future, but for now, this will do fine. And what we want to happen when we add is that whatever the user has currently typed in needs to get added to this to-do list array here. And so in a similar way, we did on change here, we can also do on click here. And this is a similar callback function, the same way that on change is called every time the value in text area changes. On click is called every time the button is clicked. And in a similar way, since a click doesn't have any like data associated with it, it doesn't take any parameters. And then now we have our same little function syntax here where we can type what we'd like. And so the first thing I'm going to do is grab whatever our current to-do list is. So I'll say like temp list here equals this dot state dot to-do list. And what I'm doing here is just going to the state, and I'm just grabbing a local copy of whatever is in this to-do list variable. The next thing I want to do is do temp list dot add, or dot push, I'm sorry. And dot push is just JavaScript's way of adding something new to this array. If you're unfamiliar with the syntax, it's very similar to an array list in Java. And so we'll push on to this array, the current state. So I'll do this dot state dot new item here. And so now temp list has this new item, or whatever was in that text box is now in it. And then we'll do a this dot set state. And set state is really important here. It's how React knows when it should start checking for changes and try re-rendering. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say to-do list is equal to our temp list. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of extra here, and I'll say that new item is just equal to nothing anymore. And the beauty of this is that it resets the field, right? So whatever they had typed now disappears, and we add the new item to our list. So we'll go over here, and I'll type, I need to get homework done. And when I hit add, you can see it disappears. Right now, it's in the state. We just can't see it. And so the next thing we want to do is make it so that we can see everything that's in this to-do array. Are there any questions about that? That was kind of a lot right there. And so definitely feel free to ask questions.
Yes. Actually, we did not mention this. I should have mentioned this earlier. One part of React is that the state is read-only. But the only way that you can access it is through set state. And the reason why they do this is because what set state does is it also triggers a re-render of the component, kind of like what we described earlier. Otherwise, if you're kind of messing with the state willy-nilly, React doesn't know when to re-render the component. It has to be kind of constantly monitoring the state. But this way, like inside of set state, it triggers the re-render of the component.
That is a great question, and that's one of the things that I found personally the hardest to understand at the start was that you have to use set state for everything. The only exception to that in the constructor here, this is the only time that you can directly modify the state. Every other time after the constructor is called, you'll have to use set state.
You can also,
and if you don't use set state, yeah, you go, Nate.
Oh, sorry. You can kind of think of this again in Java terms. You have like getters and setters of is like the best practice to use in Java. You want to have like, you don't want to be able to access this instance variables directly. So you have like a set state. So set the instance variables to be something. It's part of like the best practices of React. Sorry.
Yep. Do we get another chat?
I got it.
Yep. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is take this array and we want to render it on the screen. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I want this, the way I'd like this to-do list to look is I'd like it to just be a list of bullet points of everything that we've added to it. And so to do that, I'm just going to do an li here for list, or I'm sorry, I need to do an unordered list. It's the ul. And so ul stands for unordered list, and that's how you just get the dots of the list. And this is just an HTML syntax. And then inside of here,
sorry, first you can just show them kind of what, just do like one li and just put like what it looks like.
Yeah, and so here
you can put multiple LIs, and each LI will be a button or a bullet point. Sorry.
And so now you can see we've got this nice bullet point. It's formatted nicely. It's off to the side, and if I add just one more here, you can see they'll both be formatted nicely, like that. But we don't want to statically write all these list items because we can't know what the user is going to type in. And so instead, now we need to go to the state again. And this is where we get back to the single source of truth, right? Everything in your React component should be derived from the state, and this situation is no different. And so the way we use JSX is we make these curly braces, and then we'll say this dot state dot to-do list. And so to-do list is an array, and we can use the fantastic dot map function here. And what map lets us do is we can pass in a item, right? So map will iterate through the array and pass in whatever's at the array as this variable item here. And I'll make this an arrow function. And then we can just say list item for item here.
One more thing I wanted to add in here. The list, or what you can think about map is that it's iterating over the array and then applying a function on every single item. So for every item in this array, it's applying this function and it's making a list item for each.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so I'll go back over here. And so now if I say I need to do my homework, and when I click, you can see that homework now shows up right here. I need to prepare for this presentation. And if I hit add, you can see it also shows up here as well. If you deleted any item from the array, it would also be updated. But to keep it simple, this is the complete demo. And one other great thing I want to show you is that we can also go down here and I can type something else. So maybe Nate needs to get his slides. And I can click add, and you can see that these two, although they're both derived from the same exact code, they have completely independent states and completely independent ops. And this is incredibly useful when you're coding a lot of components that need like similar things in lots of places, but you want to have them each separate. React makes sure that the state of each component is completely isolated from the state of all the other components, and that's a really useful thing to have.
Yeah, one more thing, you can just get rid of like the extra text you have next to the add.
Yep.
Yeah, we were just using that to show you guys. So yeah, now you can kind of see a better demo of it in action.
And you can see it just keeps adding them. And this is all really performant. It's really lightweight. It'll run very well on pretty much anyone's browser. And it does work on any browser that you want, except maybe like really old versions of Internet Explorer. But it's really great in that situation. I'm going to keep sharing my screen, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute or send them in the chat now. The end of this session is really just going to be like sort of a Q&A time. I'm happy to write more code to demonstrate things if you have more questions, but otherwise that's the extent of the demo that we were going to give today.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
I'll answer questions to the best of my ability. I don't claim to be an expert on React, but I have used it in a couple big projects, so I kind of know my way around it.